When you decide you're going to want to do a homestead, or you want to get out of the city out to the country, property lines are probably going to be one of your biggest issues. So many people that are moving to the country and coming from the city, you guys may need to think about, you know, what I'm talking about. You know, I wanted to talk about some things this morning that might help some people. It's a topic that I don't know that I've ever seen discussed on YouTube. I like to call it neighborship. When you decide you're going to want to do a homestead, or you want to get out of the city out to the country, which is outstanding. I mean, I grew up in the country, but I lived in the city for a little while. I encourage anybody that wants to get out of the city and get out to the rural areas and get a little property, man, do it. It's awesome. Everything is just so much slower and laid back and quiet and calm and all of those things. You'll love it. But on the topic of neighborships, it's a relationship with our neighbors. And we want to have good relationships with our neighbors. You know, not only is that biblical, but it just makes it makes everything work better. You know, we love our neighbors. We want to love our neighbors. We want them to love us. So everything just works a lot better if you go into your new property with that type of mentality. Now, does that mean that you're not going to have some things that you have to work through with your neighbors? No. Relationships are work. If any of you guys are married, you know that. Lisa will tell you that. She'll tell you that every day. Oh man, it is work. You gotta be willing to give and take. And you gotta be ready to make an effort to have a neighborship. Let's get some food out for the dogs here real quick. Hey guys, what do you say? The dogs are feeling a little frisky because there's supposed to be a front coming in, and we're supposed to get them. I hate to even say it, but they're predicting quite a bit of rain, maybe 4 to 5 inches. Hey. Hey, Andy. Come on. Come on, Andy. But they sense it coming, and there's some other things that sense it's coming, and I will verify there is definitely a cold front coming.
Oh my gosh.
We just had a cat recently, one of our cats, Honey, that we found her dead, and I told Lisa that it looked like it was probably from a snake bite, because I could tell kind of where she was maybe hit. And I walked out here this morning to let Kate out, and as I walked in, I caught this out of the corner of my eye by the door. That is a timber rattler. So we're going to see if we can't relocate him. So when you have property in the country, a homestead, a farm, a ranch, whatever, you're going to have issues that arise with respect to, one of the biggest issues is going to be fencing and property lines and all of that kind of stuff. And I'm just going to encourage everybody that when you get into that situation, and you will get into it eventually, remember you want a good neighborship, because it's so much more fun if you like your neighbors and you can do stuff with your neighbors and have get-togethers with your neighbors. It's so much more fun. But when you're dealing with that type of stuff, the number one rule use common sense. If you have a property line that goes like this, and there's a big creek that runs in here and just cuts back just like that, and instead of going down and having a water gap on that creek and right back up and having a water gap there, the fence is just moved over here and just around like that. It's not on the line, but you know the fence isn't going to get washed out. That's good. That's a good common sense solution to something like that. If you buy a property that's like that, and there's a fence similar to that situation, the property line, it doesn't matter. You still own that. I still own that. Let it go. It's not a big deal. It's way more beneficial to have the fence somewhere where a flood's not going to wash it out, where cars aren't going to run through it when they hit a corner constantly. You know, where the neighbor can get down maybe a good road to get to his place like you can. It's so much better to go into it with that attitude. So I encourage you to use common sense. Another thing to remember is to always try to put yourself in the other person's shoes. And that's something that we all learned when we were younger. And so it's probably stuck with us a little bit. But as my son has recently told me, and he is 24, he sees a lot of people. As he runs into more and more people that are older, the older they are, usually the grouchier they are. So I think part of that is we're just tired, but part of that is we're getting to where we're just thinking about ourselves, and I'm as guilty as anybody. So it really helps to establish neighborships if you put yourself in the other person's shoes. If you go out and buy a property to homestead and you're wanting to raise, let's say you're wanting to raise goats like we do, and you've decided that the fixed knot fence is what you want to do, and that's an outstanding choice for a perimeter fence, by the way. So you're looking at your fence that's around your property, which is, you know, yours and your neighbor's, and it's a barbed wire fence. It's a good barbed wire fence, but it's just a barbed wire fence. It doesn't make any sense, and you're not thinking of your neighbor if you go to them and say, hey, I'd like to build net wire fence here for goats, and I was wondering if you want to go halves. Put yourself in their position. If you've got a perfectly good fence for running cattle and that's all you're doing, and somebody says, hey, I'd like to replace this with goat fence, you want to go halves? No, I don't want to go halves. And neither would you if you're in their position. Likewise, if you're going to run giraffes and you want to replace the fence with 10-foot tall fence and you ask them to go halves, don't even ask them. Just say, hey, is it all right if I put giraffe fence in right here? It's going to be real secure for cattle. I'll do all the braces, and you won't have to do a thing. I'll take care of that fence. Then they'll be excited about it. Matter of fact, if they're doing the same thing, they might say, well, hey, let me come help you build it. You know, it goes both ways. But put yourself in their shoes. That's going to help you in the long run. It's going to help nurture that neighborship. Property lines are probably going to be one of your biggest issues. If you buy a property and you want to run goats, like I just said, and there's a fence there that is falling apart. It's a cow fence. The guy next to you has cows, or he has horses or bulls or something that just needs a 5-wire barbed wire. But the fence is falling down. It's rusted. It's been there 100 years. You know, if something touches it, it breaks. The farmer or rancher over there is constantly having to fix it. And you go to him and say, hey, I'd like to replace this fence. I want to put goat fence in there. If you're thinking, if you put yourself in his position, now I'm in his position. Oh, I'm excited that we want to redo the fence. That's great. Do you want to pay for goat fence versus a 5-wire barbed wire? And you're a cow guy and that's all you're ever going to run? No. So you shouldn't expect them to go halves and he, the other guy or she, shouldn't expect to have to go halves. You go back to the common sense side. What makes sense is calculate how much it would cost to do a cow fence. Pay that much in half. So it's not difficult. If you put yourself in the other person's position, think about, why do they have their property? Or if you're a farm owner or a homestead owner, and another homestead owner comes in next to you, get to know them a little bit, visit with them. Why do they have the property? Do they have it for recreation? Do they have it for meditation? Do they have it for raising their own food? Once you kind of have an idea of what it's for, then you kind of have a little better understanding when you put yourself in their shoes. Another thing you can do is be willing to adjust. Maybe you have a guy or a gal that bought property to hunt next to you, and let's say it's not a very big place, so the majority of their property is going to be impacted by what you're doing on your place. A way to adjust, because you've already visited with them and you already know why they bought the property. They bought it for recreation, to hunt. They enjoy doing that stuff. Maybe a way to adjust is to not have your animals close to that property while they're hunting. Now, can you do it for the whole season? Probably not. It just depends on how your setup is. But if the season runs from October 1 through January, that would be kind of difficult. But there's some things that you can do to adjust to kind of not impact it quite so much. And they would appreciate that. And once again, you're putting yourself in their shoes if you're wanting to hunt. And you're also making an adjustment, and you're also using common sense to try and figure out how to establish and nurture a neighborship. So be willing to adjust. Try to be a giver. There's givers and takers, and we all know that, and we all know people that are takers, and we all know people that are givers. I've always had a concern about people borrowing my stuff or me borrowing somebody else's stuff. You probably know why before I even say it. But invariably, if you borrow something and you use it, something breaks. And it just puts both people in a bad situation. So consequently, it was hard for me to loan things to use. And I know people sometimes need help, and sometimes we have things, and it's hard for me to borrow things to use the same way. But the way I've got around, at least if somebody needs to borrow something, the way I've got around that is I always say, and this is how I handle it, say, well, let me come and run it, or let me come and use it, whatever they need to borrow. And that way I'm using it, and when it breaks, it was my fault. So, that's just how it is. But that's an example of how you can be a giver, and that's going to establish a great neighborship. Now, if all of these things fail to establish a great neighborship, guess what? You still need to try to be a good neighbor. That's just how it is. Eventually, you may just wear them down. That would be the good thing. Thanks for watching. We'll see you next time. You guys need to be careful. Watch for those rattlesnakes, boy. You remember what it's like, right, Blue? You remember. You don't know what it's like, do you, girl? You don't remember, but you will. If you get bit, you'll remember.